Buonasera, io sono Marco Petrinielce, ho l'onore come Presidente dell'Ordine degli Architetti, quindi di ringraziare tutti i colleghi che sono intervenuti a queste giornate. Noi, come sapete, come Ordine siamo partner di questa iniziativa, insieme anche alla Fondazione Umbra per l'Architettura. Vi porto i saluti della Presidente, l'architetto Virna Venerucci, che purtroppo non è potuta essere presente questa sera. Io non mi dilungherei molto perché, come sapete, abbiamo uno dei momenti più belli di questi nostri incontri, per cui sarò molto breve, solo qualche notazione. Come voi sapete, tutti noi architetti abbiamo una propria classifica delle preferenze e io stasera devo confessarvi che per me è un grande onore poter introdurre Thorsen del gruppo Snøhetta, che io considero veramente all'apice di tutto il nostro sistema nell'architettura mondiale, per delle ragioni molto semplici. La prima è perché ogni loro opera è sempre sostenuta, ogni loro segno, da un profondo senso dell'etica e non c'è protagonismo nelle loro architetture, a differenza di altri celebrati nomi del panorama internazionale. Ogni loro segno è sempre sostenuto da un pensiero forte, da un pensiero profondamente etico. E a me piace sempre ricordare la frase di Ulai che diceva che un'estetica senza etica è solo cosmetica. Ecco, molto spesso in alcune opere vediamo che è troppo forte il segno del protagonismo dell'architetto che vuole in qualche modo celebrare la propria attività. Ecco, questo nel gruppo Snøhetta è completamente sconosciuto. Ho letto da qualche parte che loro a volte considerano la natura il loro committente. Questa è una cosa che mi ha profondamente colpito. Sono stato recentemente a New York e se voi vedete il memoriale dell'11 settembre capirete profondamente qual è la sensibilità di questi progettisti, che tra l'altro sono un collettivo, e questo la dice lunga anche su quanto si differenzino rispetto al resto del panorama internazionale. Io adesso senz'altro allora vi auguro un buon proseguimento dei lavori con questa eccezionale presentazione e lascerei la parola a Laura Ragazzola, che introdurrà sicuramente in modo più approfondito di me il protagonista della serata, l'architetto Thorsen. Grazie, buonasera.
Buonasera, innanzitutto do un benvenuto caloroso a questa bellissima platea. Siete davvero tantissimi, mi manca anche un po' il fiato, sono un po' emozionata, però spero di farcela. Innanzitutto voglio anche dare un saluto caloroso al nostro ospite, l'architetto Kjetil Thorsen, co-founder dello studio internazionale Snøhetta con base ad Oslo. Devo dire che io sono sempre molto contenta quando devo parlare di Snøhetta. È uno studio che seguo da molti anni, che conosco piuttosto bene, e stasera è sicuramente una bellissima occasione per condividere con voi il fascino dell'architettura che viene dal nord. Guardate, è un mondo che ho avuto la fortuna di esplorare, viaggiando parecchio nei paesi del nord Europa, visitando cantieri e naturalmente anche edifici realizzati, quindi musei, teatri, scuole, città, strade, piazze, parchi. E insomma, non posso nascondervi che questa frequentazione ha fatto nascere in me una grandissima passione per tutto quello che succede nel nord Europa nel campo dell'architettura e dell'urbanistica. Certo, dobbiamo appunto dire che mi piacerebbe anche condividere con voi, ma proprio rubando pochissimi minuti, per spiegarvi i motivi di questa mia passione, per cercare un po' di tratteggiare quelle che sono le caratteristiche dell'architettura nordica. Innanzitutto, l'architettura dei paesi del nord è inclusiva e coinvolgente. È capace di immaginare luoghi e spazi che ci coinvolgono dal punto di vista emotivo e intellettuale. Le persone li sentono come propri, perché poi un altro tratto distintivo dell'architettura del nord è che non è una pratica calata dall'alto, ma è un'esperienza collettiva, L'architettura è vicina alle persone, vi posso dire proprio per esperienza che tutte le persone, anche le persone più comuni, si interessano di architettura, perché in quei paesi l'architettura è, diciamo, un tema che è rivolto a tutti e non solo agli addetti ai lavori. E proprio in questo caso succede che l'architettura riesce a dare molto di più di quello che noi ci possiamo aspettare. E quando un progetto diventa più generoso del dovuto, cosa succede? Succede che uno si sente coinvolto, perché lì sta bene, lì è a suo agio, lì sente empatia, lì sente anche, come posso dire, una certa felicità, lì sente una condivisione di emozioni. Bene, di questo spirito lo studio Snøhetta è stato ed è attualmente uno dei maggiori promotori ed interpreti. Ci ha messo il grande talento e la creatività dei fondatori, la coerenza del suo approccio, la responsabilità, la capacità di attrarre giovani e brillanti architetti, fra l'altro anche dall'Italia. È uno studio globale che ha portato in tutto il mondo questa visione, progettare non solo edifici, ma progettare esperienze, emozioni, diciamo sentimenti. E allora ci chiediamo, ma esiste davvero un legame tra l'architettura e i sentimenti? Certo che esiste. Basta entrare in uno degli edifici di Snøhetta per rendervi conto che non è un edificio, è un organismo vivente che vi parla, che ha un linguaggio, che voi riuscite a capire, perché è un linguaggio che emoziona, è un linguaggio che conquista. Chi ha avuto la fortuna di andare a visitare Oslo non può non essere rimasto, diciamo, affascinato, colpito dall'Opera House, questo teatro fantastico realizzato appunto da Snøhetta, che sembra quasi un iceberg che emerge dalle acque fredde del mare del nord. Perché quello non è solo un teatro, non è solo un posto dove voi potete andare a sentire la musica, a vedere un'opera, ad assistere a un balletto. No, quello è un luogo pubblico, aperto giorno e notte, è una sorta di piazza. Addirittura potete salire sul tetto ed ammirare lo straordinario panorama del fiordo su cui si affaccia Oslo. È un posto dove potete incontrarvi, chiacchierare, discutere, studiare, lavorare, danzare, litigare, innamorarvi. E addirittura si può anche fare un talk, che è proprio quello che noi abbiamo fatto, proprio con Kjetil Thorsen, insieme a un suo giovane architetto, fra l'altro italiano, Tommaso Maserati, l'anno scorso, e abbiamo realizzato un tavolo di SID che proprio abbiamo mandato in onda nella scorsa edizione, proprio qui, in questo palcoscenico. Ma diciamo che gli esempi sono tantissimi, mi viene anche in mente il ristorante Under, che è un ristorante sottomarino. Voi cenate e potete vedere i pesci e il fondale marina, però, come giustamente Kjetil Thorsen mi suggeriva in occasione di un'intervista che feci per l'opening del ristorante, sono i pesci che vengono a vedere noi. Siamo noi questa volta nella boccia di vetro. Diciamo che gli esempi potrebbero essere tantissimi e potremmo stare anche qui delle ore, ma la faccio breve. Ricordo soltanto un episodio che naturalmente riguarda Kjetil Thorsen. Nel 2018, in occasione di un'intervista che feci allo studio Snøhetta per i 30 anni della loro attività, chiesi a Kjetil Thorsen qual era la prima cosa che gli veniva in mente guardando indietro i 30 anni della sua attività, del suo lavoro. E la sua risposta mi sorprese tantissimo, perché lui mi disse: quando vidi per la prima volta Craig. Craig è Greg Dickers, che sarebbe il partner, il socio con cui Snøhetta ha fondato nel 1998 lo studio. Bene, signore e signori, non mi parlò di edifici e teatri, biblioteche, case, piazze. In 30 anni Snøhetta ne ha fatti tantissimi. Non mi parlò neanche di premi, e vi posso garantire che il palmarès è davvero straordinario. Non mi parlò neanche di se stesso, mi parlò semplicemente di amicizia. Questa è l'architettura dei sentimenti di Snøhetta, e questo è Kjetil Thorsen, che noi non vediamo l'ora di averlo qui sul palco per ascoltare la sua conferenza. Grazie.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Wow. I think we must all be freaks coming at this time of the day to talk about architecture. It's just crazy. Thank you so much for coming. Really, I do appreciate it very much. You know, the title of was not, again, as we heard earlier today, not necessarily said by me, but just taste the word in Italian, sentimento. Oh my God, it's beautiful. But it's only part of a complexity which we heard in the lecture before me today. I think we have to be in a situation today where things are seriously different from what they used to be. At the very, very beginning of our studio, we had these long discussions on what new practice in architecture might mean. How do you actually respond to certain situations in architecture when you organize your own work with your own people? How do you move forward to be able to actually dive into the problems that we have today? How do you pull back when you know you can't solve it? And how do you ask the questions? Collectively, dear friends, collectively. But also, I'd like to quote one poet, Selena Godman, because right today, the things that we're discussing are so easily embodied in the direction of hopelessness. But she says, pessimism is for lightweights. There is no straight line, white line. It's the bumps and the obstacles that make this road yours and mine. Now make sure that if you go for a straight walk, like my grandfather used to say, you have to use your head and your body. You have to look down so you don't stumble. You have to look forward to see where you're going. You have to look up to dream, and sometimes you have to turn around and look back to see where you came from. And this is how Snøhetta was established. In this little loft, in the middle of Oslo, small kind of unified thing. And the ideas that this was based on was a UN report. Our Common Future was the name of this report. It was written by a former Prime Minister, Gro Harlem Brundtland. And it was the first time in the history of UN that environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and economic sustainability were defined into a communal UN document. And we said, it must be possible collectively in our own professions to translate this into our physical environment. It must be possible to understand the deep end of social sustainability transferred into environmental and economic sustainability in our profession based on a political document. Now, of course, this led to some kind of strangeness in the way we were reacting to certain things. For instance, the singular in the plural element, also in debates with Jean-Claude Nancy, the French philosopher, is saying, you know, that if you're relating to being with someone else, or you're developing with the client, with the user groups, then being is the absolute situation. We define that as collective intuition. On one hand, the collectiveness. On the other hand, intuition, which is normally individual experienced. Now that, of course, means that in the way of transforming these things, architecture is complex. We have to embrace this complexity and make sure that we don't ever move back by saying, I, me, I can solve everything. It can only be solved collectively. Only. And I'm totally convinced that unless we embrace this complexity and we think there are simple solutions, singular solutions to the issues that are at hand, we're going to fail. So please, everyone who can share something with the neighbor at that point in time when they experience that they're head-on with something they cannot solve, invite the collective in. For us, it started with the Library of Alexandria competition, where we said, okay, social environmental impact that this library might have on the city of Alexandria became extraordinarily important. We were receiving all kinds of criticism at the time, saying, why would you spend such an amount of money in a city where half of the population were illiterate? There's only one answer to that. That's the reason why. You need a library to get out of the illiterate situation. We were back visiting it now, a little more than 20 years after it was opened. We had workshops with the students. Jorunn Sandnes, who's sitting here, is the artist of the surrounding wall with all the graphics in them, the collections. But I'd rather just talk about a little bit how these things came together when we came back. Now you have to imagine, since then, since we created this library, there's been a lot of political tra-ra. There's been the Arabic Spring. There's been the change in Egypt of all kinds of political movements in there. But the library has been stable because it was based on a law, Law Number 1, 2001, to rule its operations. It can employ people without having to go to Parliament. It can get its money from wherever it wants to without the approval. And that also means that it moves away from all of the kind of money that might be shifted around in such an environment. So of course, for us, coming back now was a huge experience. We wanted to see how it's been operating. We've been in contact with the Alexandria Library since the opening, but you know, it's really quite important for me to understand how it operates. So that brings me back to one very important sentence here for me. There is no architecture without people. There is no such thing as architecture for the sake of architecture alone.
And just basically having the library here, even with or without knowing about the background and everything, it's like a center where you can come to be and come to learn and come to mingle with a lot of people who have the same intellectual sort of thoughts in mind.
That, in addition to the public ownership of a building like this, which is all about accessibility. You allow people inside and they will protect it. In all our cities right now, we're noticing fence after fence after fence. Things are being shut off. Things are being kept away from the public. What is happening if we continue doing that? All these spaces are going to be estranged to the public of our cities, and no one is going to take care of it. Here, during the Arabic Spring, the people of Alexandria were holding hand 24/7 to protect the library. The next one we were lucky to win was the Opera House in Oslo, which has the same kind of principles. Accessibility, openness, allowing people onto it. We took it one step further, because here, all of a sudden, it's possible to sit on the roof and develop a very intimate relationship with the building, which after a while led us to believe that maybe it's possible to say that architecture is the art of prepositions. Where is my body in relationship to the object? I'm on, in, over, behind, in front. Everything is a relational understanding of where your body is located. And it's obvious. We really almost don't have to talk about it because it's always there. If you can touch it, you can own it. If you cannot touch it, it's distant. We need this intimacy between the objects of our surroundings and the people of the city. And we need to open it even more sometimes to be able for us to understand that the interactivity and the public ownership that we're bringing into these buildings are demanding, yes, from an organizational point of view, but you get so much more back. We have to change the trend of making our cities less accessible for the amount of people. We have to make sure that our cities are no longer segregated according to money. In Norway, you almost can't sit down anywhere without having to buy a cappuccino. There are no free benches anymore in the cities. Every time you sit down, you have to pay. We're trying to create what we call cappuccino-free zones. And they actually do work because all of a sudden, you establish a certain different relationship between where you are, what you do, and why you do it. So I have to say, again, back to this notion of architecture being a tool to create certain situations in society that might move you towards a better future, capturing not only the people who know about architecture today, but maybe even the next generation. Which of course was also extremely important with the memorial, the Ground Zero Memorial Pavilion, where all of the things that we were dealing with actually had to do with the contact, eye contact. Where's your new horizon? Remember, the horizon always follows your eyes. If you're 200 meters up with your eyes, the horizon is 200 meters with you up there. So everything is about relationships in architecture, transparencies, light. Of course, since then, a lot of things have happened. We are now a lot of people in different locations around the world, very autonomous in every portion of the place. It's not like the home office, as we call it in Oslo, designs everything, and then the studios in the different locations pick up the sketches coming from the office in Oslo. No, they develop their own projects in their own context, and they have to be able to. But to secure that we are thinking more or less the same within the different professions, we gather from all over the world every second year to walk to the top of the mountain of Snøhetta. It really is quite great. You know, this kind of notion between gravity and the body again. And like Laurie Anderson said, you know, walking is preventing yourself from falling forward slightly. And I think it's beautiful because, again, it brings us back to the premises of architecture: gravity, light, movements, horizon. The simple things, but so complex and so complicated to deal with. We are doing graphic design, product design, we're doing art, Johan again, and we're doing very small projects sometimes. Like here, this little reindeer pavilion, which is sort of the borderline between nature and man-made structures. So right here from the inside, the wild animals come up to the window and look into the human zoo and say, I'm not inside there, you are, I'm outside. And it makes a difference because these things are related to how you use nature. Right now we're overemphasizing the use of nature, misusing nature, because we're spreading thin everywhere. What we're trying to do is to lock it into certain movements in nature so we can keep nature clean, bare, from a lot of densification in tourism. And we've done that in quite some few situations, like here for the Norwegian Tourist Association, staying overnight. It's part of what we call keyless structures, structures without locks, without keys. You can come and go whenever you want to. You can leave the money behind. All of a sudden, you know, you meet some people, you fall in love. Nothing would be better. These things actually do develop, down to the smallest kind of steps of things that you're dealing with in nature, where sort of the way of looking at things and the slow movements of things all of a sudden become part of these designs that you're longing for. So again, back to the sentiment. Of course, yes, we're there. We're stepping lightly. We're trying to hold things back. We're trying to be connected to our environment. We're trying to understand what we're doing at all times. Whether it's, you know, a restaurant being sunken by the crane into the water, actually fighting, like Jean Prouvé said, architecture has nothing to resist but nature itself. In that particular location, the experience between the marine biological research from the university in Kristiansand and the wish from two brothers to have a restaurant. And all of a sudden you have a new program. And this program then, with all the designs that we do continuously, is then the artificial reef, where you discover new species simply by sitting behind the window and looking out, bringing them down, making the notes. I think it's fantastic. We need to redefine programs for the future. We need to write programs differently. We need to find out how these things are going to go. But of course, here in this particular case, when the sort of artificial reef starts connecting nature back to its own body of work, then of course the next generation of growth will be the mussels, the next generation will be the shellfish, and so it keeps going and continuing. A little bit back to complexity. This is the northernmost powerhouse in the world. It produces twice as much energy as it uses, so it brings back to the grid. It's simple. It's easy to do. You can do it here, all the way up in the north by Trondheim, so there should be no reason for us not to have a CO2 neutral building calculated, including all embodied CO2 equivalents, to pay back that equivalent over, say, 25 years. I know it's slow. I know it's slow, but it's better than nothing. And I think these things are important. Right now, we're working on a combination where we bring this even further through natural ventilation, what we call 000 buildings, where you have no heating, energy external for heating, cooling, or ventilation. So if we can bring this kind of knowledge together with the powerhouse knowledge that we have, then maybe we can get to a point where the CO2 emissions definitely are getting further down. I have to say that this building was voted the second most ugly building in Norway in the last year. I feel kind of proud. But it is this way of moving things forward and making sure that the cladding materials, the operational elements, the things that we're dealing with are in line with how we think and where we want to go. Now, we've just finished another very strange program building. For the Sami people, those are First Nation people in the northern parts of Norway. And the Sami have a long reindeer herding tradition. They move east-west, not north-south. And this connection east-west is very important because they are still herding their reindeer across the border lines between Russia, over Finland, Sweden, and so forth. So we were asked to design a theater for this Sami people. It's the National Sami Theater, but it's also a school for reindeer herding. So it's a secondary school for reindeer herding, for creating handicrafts, the Sami handicraft, which is called dojti, and the National Theater. So we took the lower bone, which is called shorvematta in Lappish or in Sami, which is just the strongest part of the horn. And we turned it into a building. And by creating that building, we managed to bring in the slaughterhouse and the theater next door. It's quite nice because you bring the reindeer in, they go to the kitchen, they go to the restaurant. Just on the other side, you have the stage. We could even use that in a different way. So bringing in artists locally is, of course, totally important to us, and we will understand the tradition of art after having worked many years with Jorunn, to understand that this notion of art in architecture can both be a different speed, it can be in contradiction, or it can expand the thinking within the architecture, follow it. I love this, it's called the Sam. It's a Sami artist. And we just had to bring it in. Unfortunately, they located these chairs in front, but it doesn't matter. This building is now so successful already, and I have to say, from my point of view, just partaking in something that isn't the leftovers of the south of Norway for the Sami people is so great. There are so many things that they have received, which is just, okay, we don't need it in the south, so we just send it north. And too many places in the world are reacting like this. Australia, Canada, even partially New Zealand. So we're trying to hold on to this kind of communal approach where you include a lot of people you create with, wherever we're working. And here, for instance, in Melbourne, the old tea house in the middle was supposed to be expanded. And we've been fighting now for 4.5 years to create a building that might hold up against the situation in Melbourne. You know, it's a very dense city in many ways, where things are not happening always in the right way. But we believe that this building can contribute slightly differently in the way it's reacting. And then all the way back up to the northern parts of Norway for fishing industries, creating jobs and designing factories. Why are architects not designing factories? We have to design factories, we have to design everything to make it a better place. Like here, the old slaughterhouse in Milan transformed into an environmental structure. It is important to move these things forward, to make sure that our discussions are kept, that our discussions are driven forward by the reaction of landscape architecture, architecture design, urbanism. Like here in Verona, the old tabacchi, right? You have to take care of things. Otherwise, we're going to lose in the long run. You have to put architecture in the position where it needs to move forward without pessimism, making sure that we believe that it can solve anything at all. Or like here, Perspektivenweg in Innsbruck, with the small inscription by the philosopher Wittgenstein, where things are sort of the wording and the creation of an object belongs all together in a certain type of landscapes. Things are right before your eyes. What a beautiful quote. Bang, in your face, Wittgenstein. You should read Wittgenstein. And I think all these things bring us to a certain point where we have to make sure that accessibility, relevance, architecture in nature and landscape becomes part of how we think. So for instance, the Alps, here with an example from Alpbach. Normally the Alps, full of tourists, have bars and coffee shops and restaurants and potato chips and hamburgers everywhere. No, when we do a building, it's for you to come there and you can't buy damn shit. You have to bring your own things to eat. Because the open source elements in a commercial world of architecture needs to hold back. We need to allow people who are not willing and cannot pay. It's more than expensive enough to go skiing already. So why are you charging money for things inside when you actually all you want to do is to come and eat whatever you have? Or back to the cultural elements of this, like the recreation of the Lascaux caves, 30,000 years old, with the most incredible paintings on the wall, where the paintings are painted with the movement of the cave in mind, so the shortening of the perspective is painted in the painting 30,000 years ago. No wonder Picasso was looking at these cows and said, okay, if I can do half as good, I'll probably become very famous. It's absolutely amazing to do recreation of things where the human spirit and the human mind breaks all barriers of time. We think 3 generations is a long time. Nothing. But we have to make sure that we fight at the level we want to fight. And of course, the problem with creating artificial caves as a copy is always based on the fact that somebody might believe that you're actually coming into the real cave. Of course not. So once you come out of the cave, you have to show that this is an artificial cave representation by showing exactly how it was constructed, how it was built up, so you never believe anything else than the fact that it is a contemporary piece of work and not historically. But the paintings are historical. The copies, the origin of the origin is there. And of course, we have discussions of different kinds when you move into different countries. In Norway, there is a huge debate whether, Snøhetta should be engaged in Saudi Arabia, for instance. I mean, as if we did have a certain situation of debates and discussions. And we met last time in Riyadh, and it was a notion of saying, there are so many things missing in these situations. Why are we not providing them with, when we're asked in, we're invited in, we're not pushing ourselves there. We're invited in and say, why don't you share your knowledge with us so we can have a museum, an opera house. And the first one we did was the ITHRA, which is a sort of strange building, a little bit based on the conversations from Invisible Cities, where Marco Polo and Kublai Khan, Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, Kublai Khan and Marco Polo have these discussions about these cities around the world, and all of a sudden there is this discussion on the Roman arch. And the keystone of the Roman arch is our culture. This is what Marco Polo says. If you remove it, the Roman arch will collapse. Right. So we established a building which has a keystone, referring back to the Italo Calvino discussion. So the smallest element in a value chain is holding the whole structure up. By doing that, you're pinpointing at something. Okay, you have not solved everything. Your politics are not completely okay, but you're moving forward. And it is possible to provide something for the public that was more than you had before. Like the library, where all of a sudden young girls and young girls and young boys can fall in love. Just behind the bookshelves, or look at the possibilities of how you generate a certain type of buildings. In this case, by cooling through the pipes, stainless steel pipes, 300 kilometers of stainless steel pipes, cools the building quite nicely. But also moving inside in the big exhibition rooms, showing for the first time painters like Edvard Munch, the Norwegian painter in Saudi Arabia. You have to remember that these things don't happen by themselves. Somebody needs to push. Also, in the Western world, we have the same issues, okay, the transformation of Times Square. And maybe Angel will be saying something about this yesterday also, but this transformation all of a sudden relaxes and develops the possibilities that you have for human interaction. You remove the cars, you bring in the people, and all of a sudden new things happen because your body is in a place where the cars used to be all the time and you've never been there before. First time. And that happens when you do large projects like here in Sydney, or when you do even more in Shanghai. I have to say, you know, this notion of this opera house that we're doing in Shanghai for the moment is more or less like an experiment. Because when we did the opera house in Oslo, walking on the roof as a way of giving it back to the public and saying, okay, first move on the roof, second move into the lobby, third move into this space like, you know, this beautiful space here. Okay, let's test this also in China and in Korea and see if it works. But we didn't know that the program from the client said, and it has this many halls, this many public, blah, 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 and you have to be able to walk on the roof. So we're sort of biting our tail in the typology discussions here already, and I don't want to be there, but we're testing it. It's under construction. It'll be strange. It is kind of changing everything you know about perspective in the way you move through this enormous situation of things that is happening for the moment. And it's bringing your body again into a totally new situation of things where the things that you do no longer stand still. So the movement is basically bang, in there. And you're part of that object and you're seeing it the way it moves. The same in many ways with the new city library in Beijing, where the landscape, interior landscape, and the building itself is just opening itself to you as a library space. And from that point of view, you create something that you give back. It's publicly accessible. You walk in, you can walk through it without lending a book. There is a valley in the middle with the door here and the door there, and you can use it as a public walkway. It's full of young people now. This is before it started filling up, really. But I think it's interesting to jump from these big projects and then to this tiny little Notta hotel project in Japan for deep snow skiing, of course. I don't know what to say. I think we need to fight for all the consistency in the architecture, in the landscape, in the arts, in the design that we're doing. Fight for the good things. If we can manage, like I'm hoping that we can manage here also with the new Roosevelt Library in the States, where biodiversity, connecting, bringing landscapes back, sort of gives kind of a hope. Thank you. Any questions?